Okay, so then, to begin with, first of all, many of you have already heard me talk about embedded theology several times, both from the pulpit and in class. Embedded theology is the theology that you accepted. Maybe it come from your grandma and your grandpa took you to church, your mom and your dad took you to church, and you just accepted certain points of theology. The first pastor, the first book you ever read. There's probably been very few people who have ever come to Christ who did so by sitting down and doing a 70-hour study of all things theology and got all of their theology in a perfect row and then accepted Christ, right? So now it's very possible that this afternoon, I'm going to be counter to your embedded theology. If you've been raised to have one particular view, and I'm coming with a different view, that threatens your embedded theology, and that's always a bit scary, and it's always a bit, challenging, especially the idea Christians haven't always believed this. I thought Christians always believed this, throughout the centuries and so forth. Now, one of the important things is you guys know me. You've heard me preach. You've heard me teach. You know me. I'm not some guy walking in randomly and suddenly introducing a new thing. This is actually not a new thing. It's just not a popular thing in the Western Church, in the Americas. If I do not convince you and convert you today to my way of thinking, that's fine. I'll keep working on you. Seriously, this is not a salvific issue in the least bit. Christians for the last 2,000 years have disagreed on how exactly to understand the end times, how exactly to understand the book of the Revelation. All of this stuff, right? Yesterday during Sunday school, we watched a video, and the speaker spoke about the Qumran community. Those are the Dead Sea Scroll people. They left Jerusalem. They were fed up with the priest system in Jerusalem. They saw it as corrupt. They decided to go out into the desert and do Judaism the way they thought you should do Judaism. Interestingly, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have their copies of the Old Testament. We have their copies of commentaries, their interpretations of the Old Testament. We also have their sectarian writings, what their group thought about things. And interestingly, they read the same Old Testament we read, with the exception of the book of Esther. We never found the book of Esther no, I'm saying that wrong. No, Esther. Yeah. They never found the book of Esther at the Dead Sea Scrolls. All the other Old Testament books they found. So they read the same Old Testament that we read, and they came to the conclusion that there's going to be two Messiahs. One would be a political Messiah. One would reestablish the throne of David and vanquish the pagan enemies. And the other would be the priestly Messiah. He would reestablish the proper Yahweh worship and set everything right as far as the... So they put political and religion into two separate areas. Now we also have the rabbinic writings, which largely would be the Pharisaic line. But we know from the New Testament period, you've got the Pharisees, you've got the Sadducees, you've got the Zealots. So we know largely what the Pharisees were thinking. We don't know a lot about what the Sadducees were thinking. And the Zealots, it's kind of hard to figure out what they were thinking because we have scattered writings from the Zealots. And oftentimes they had the idea that one of them was the Messiah. So my point though is, you have ancient people living in the land, reading the scriptures in the native language, listening to the rabbi. They weren't called rabbis yet, that comes after the fall of Jerusalem, but the elders, listening to their interpretations and wondering, what will it be like when Messiah comes? Now, when we put out the quiz then, and they answer the questions, we're going to notice they got some answers right, but they got some answers wrong. Now we today are kind of in their shoes, because we're trying to figure out, when the Messiah comes back, what's it going to be like? And I'm convinced that when you take the views and everybody takes the quiz on the other side when he comes back, we're going to find out that I got some of the answers right, but I got some of the answers wrong. And the person in that view, they got some of the answers right, but they got some of the answers wrong. And I'm not going to be surprised at that. You know, I approach this, and it's not that I don't feel convicted, don't feel that I'm right. I mean, if you've known me very long, you know that I feel like I'm right all the time, you know. But I'm also a little bit humble when it comes to this, because we are trying to figure out what did they think about the future, right? All of that said, so Sandy handed out a paper at the beginning when you guys were first, going to put on those DVDs and stuff. And it had the 4 major views. We have all-millennialism, we have post-millennialism, we have historical premillennialism, and we have premillennial dispensationalism. And these are the major views. There are actually several minor views. They're very obscure. You have to belong to certain churches that, may not even exist in your state to actually, get into those kinds of views and stuff like that. But actually, here is where I believe our word choices already put our conversation in the wrong spot. And that is, you look at these and you see the word millennia in each one of the views. The post-millennial, the premillennial, and so forth. And that puts our conversation on the topic of the millennia as if the millennia were the big thing, as if it was the thing that we disagree on and we're trying to figure out. When in reality, there are huge variances throughout the entirety of all of the views. And even within each of the views, you've got great variety within that view. For example, in premillennial dispensationalism, you have this view that one day the temple in Jerusalem will be rebuilt. And once the temple in Jerusalem is rebuilt, the sacrificial system will be started again, right? And you have some in the premillennial position that teach, especially if the rapture has happened by this point, that grace is done, the Jesus part of this is done, and now the sacrificial system is what will save you from that point on. You also have people still in that premillennial camp who say, no, it's memorial. It's not salvific, it's memorial. And they're in the same position, and they disagree on that topic, So even within my position, or at least the position I'm closest to, we disagree within. Interestingly, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk on this is because when you have somebody who doesn't hold the view trying to explain the view to you, oftentimes it's not presented right, Imagine for a moment a Democrat trying to explain a Republican to somebody. And now reverse that process. Imagine a Republican trying to explain a Democrat. Are you going to get certain points of it right? Probably. But are you going to misrepresent it, or not necessarily intentionally, but there you go. I like that one got a reaction. So with that being said, one of the things I've really not liked when I have read the view of somebody else who's trying to critique the view I hold, I really feel strawmanned in a lot of cases. What's interesting, if you remember the time I put up the spider's web, and I said, I kind of think of theology a little bit like a spider's web, and you've got these main branches of the spider's web. On this topic, the spider's web, that main branch I'm on, allies and enemies. On this topic, I have allies in churches that I would otherwise disagree with, and I have enemies that on other topics I would agree with. So if we weren't on this topic, and we were on baptism, for example, my enemies and allies on this topic would pretty much switch. if we were talking about baptism. Because my allies on this topic often baptize babies. They often wear robes when they preach and things like that. And the people who often baptize adults and don't wear robes are usually in the other camp. Whereas if we go back to baptism, suddenly my enemies and allies switch, and I'm now allies with the people that I was enemies with, and I'm now enemies with the people I was allies with. And I use that language figuratively, not literally, right? Now, why I say that this word, the millennia, already puts us in the wrong spot. Let me give you some examples. Does anybody happen to know, does the Bible ever mention the third heaven? Yes, it does mention the third heaven, doesn't it? How many times does it mention the third heaven? One time. One time, Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 talks about, I knew a guy in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in the body or out of the body, was taken up to the third heaven. Some people interpret this that Paul is speaking of himself, but not in the first person. I'm not going to settle that debate this morning. But this is the one and only reference in the whole of the Bible about the third heaven. Do you think we should build an elaborate doctrine about there being 3 levels of heaven? Probably not. And in fact, we actually understand what Paul is doing here is a Jewish reference. In the Jewish mind of the first century, the first heaven was what you could see, the clouds, the birds, etc., etc. The second heaven is the stars, the sun, the moon, the planets. The third heaven is where God is. And you can't see that, It's beyond what we can see. But you and I today don't have a 3-tiered universe. We have a solar system, and we know that we circle a star, and we know that there are other stars, and we don't have that system. Now we still, because of the way Christianity has presented it, we always think of the heaven as up, and we often think of the hell as down, But we're not dogmatic and literal about that too much, are we? I mean, we still do that, and we still think that way. Does anybody remember if the Bible mentions head coverings? The Bible does mention head coverings, and I'm looking at all you women, and not one of you has a head covering on. And yet Paul is saying that this is a practice in the church. But Paul is speaking to the Corinthians. He's speaking to a particular Gentile region that had certain norms in their dress code. And to cover your head as a female meant that you were married. And to not cover your head as a female meant that you were not married. So, that's what's going on in Paul's reference here. So that can transfer into our culture in the sense that you probably shouldn't wear a bikini to church, right? But it's not head coverings, because that's not our culture. We don't go to the store and walk down the aisle and go, she's single and he's single and she's married and he's married based on if they have something on their head, do we? We have a different symbol, for that, right? Sabbath keeping is another one. There's no New Testament clear passage that says, by the way, we still keep the Sabbath, as in the 7th day. So here we have all of these things that, should we build elaborate doctrines on these things that are only mentioned once, are probably a cultural reference, and so forth? Probably not. Now, the millennia is only ever mentioned one time in the entire Bible, and it's in Revelation chapter 20. There's no other passage throughout the entirety of Scripture that says there's going to be a millennial reign here on earth. Some people have taken some Old Testament passages and said, there's the millennia, it's right there. Well, now, that to me is one of those times, okay, let's look at the passage. Now, for example, Isaiah chapter 11, starting in verse 6, it's the famous verse, the wolf and the lamb, and the calf and the young lion, and the child will lead them. And millennialists have said that's the millennia going on right there. But if we stay in the Isaiah 11 text, there's no time code. It doesn't tell us 1,000 years. It doesn't tell us 1 year. It doesn't give us any time codes to any other events. a coming, a second coming, a tribulation, anything. There's no time codes to tell us what he's talking about. Moreover, we also have to then assume, especially if we're to take the passage literally, we have to assume that Philistia, Edom, Moab, and Ammon will be reestablished as well. And to approach those texts as everything's literal until we get to those things, and suddenly those are just enemies of Israel. And so anybody who's an enemy of Israel at that time can be Ammon or can be Philistia or so forth. Well, what you've just done is mixed your metaphors. Because you've said everything's literal until it doesn't fit your literal scheme, and then suddenly things become spiritual. Micah chapter 5 verse 4, starting in verse 4, is another place where the premillennialists have said, there's the millennia in the Old Testament. Now, interestingly, up to verse 3, chapter 5, 1, 2, and 3, is talking about the first coming of Christ. And starting in chapter 4, they say this is the millennia. But there's nothing in between verse 3 and verse 4 that would tell you there's 2,000 plus years of history going on in this. And once again, we have the other thing. There's no time code. There's nothing in Micah chapter 5 that would tell you 1,000 years, would tell you 1 year. It doesn't tell you anything about any event that comes before or any event that comes after.
What's that reference?
Micah chapter 5, starting in verse 4. Now, there are several places, and I'm not going to give every example this morning. But once again, it also falls prey to the fact that if you're going to take Micah chapter 5, verse 4 onward, as literal about the millennia, then Assyria has to be reestablished. And if Israel, in the scheme, is literal genetic Israel, then why wouldn't Assyria also have to be literal genetic Assyria? I thought I had a note here, but maybe I have it elsewhere, so bear with me. Oh, wait, I'll get to that in a second. The nature of the book of the Revelation, right? Revelation chapter 1, 12 and 13. John sees 7 lampstands and a Son of Man standing in the middle of them. Does anybody happen to know what the lampstands are? The churches. The lampstands, the 7 lampstands are the churches. We know that the 7 lampstands are the churches because Jesus tells us, by the way, those 7 lampstands you saw, those are the churches. Now let me ask you a question. Is a church a lampstand? Well, let me ask you the reverse. Is a lampstand a church?
Literally.
Literally, no.
Getting back to literal.
Yeah, getting back to the literal. This isn't a lampstand, you know? And you and I aren't literally lampstands. But now if we accept the symbolic nature of it, is a church a lampstand? Yes, because it's showing the light, it's pointing to the light. And so Jesus is telling us right away here in the first chapter of Revelation, things are going to appear this way, but they mean something more than what you see. Does anybody notice the number going on already in the book of Revelation? 7 lampstands. Do you think it's happenstance that a Jew writing down just chose off the top of his head 7 lampstands? No, there's no chance that 7 is an accident in this case, you know.
What does the 7 mean?
7 in the Jewish mind, the days of creation, perfection, the days of cleansing. You know, all of those things. So 7 can mean perfection, it can mean completeness, it can mean all of those kinds of things. The book of the Revelation, as we keep going, have you read it? It's an interesting book, isn't it? So we get past the letters to the churches and we get into the heart of the book, and suddenly John is in the heavenly throne room. There's somebody sitting on the throne and he's got a scroll and nobody's worthy to open the scroll. And so he weeps. But one of the elders says, "Don't worry, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has conquered and overcome and is worthy to take the scroll." There we go. I need to keep up on the slides. I apologize. Well, then in the very next verse, standing amongst the living creatures and the elders, he sees a lamb standing as if it were slain. What does a lamb standing as if it were slain? What is that? What would that look like? And I thought it was a lion. Now it's a lamb? Well, as we continue, this lamb is going to take the scroll out of the person sitting on the throne's hand. How does a lamb take something out of somebody's hand? A lamb doesn't have thumbs. It doesn't have fingers. What's going on here? Symbolism, right? Who is this? Who is this? Jesus. It's Jesus. How do you know that it's Jesus? The lamb that was slain. He's from the tribe of Judah. And John the Baptist says to Andrew and John that one day by the river, he says, hey, there's my relative over there. By the way, he's the Lamb of God. Now when John and Andrew looked, did they see a lamb? No, they saw a first century peasant Jew walking along that John just pointed at and said, that's the Lamb of God. So the book of the Revelation is full of symbols, all sorts of symbols. We've got 7 churches, 7 lampstands. We've got 7 seals, 7 trumpets, beasts with 7 heads, people with 7 crowns. We've got all of this going on in the book of the Revelation. Does anybody happen to know where Jesus was crucified? Golgotha, thank you. Does anybody happen to know what's close to that? Jerusalem. It's very close to Jerusalem. In fact, today, it's wherever it is, it's part of the whole city of Jerusalem. Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. Their dead bodies, this is referring to the 2 witnesses that will be slain in Revelation chapter 11. Their dead bodies will lie in the city, or in the streets of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. Was Jesus crucified in Sodom? Was Jesus crucified in Egypt? No, these are symbols that are being used to describe Jerusalem. Sodom, the great city of sin that God had to overthrow in the book of Genesis. Egypt, the land of bondage that God had to lead the people out of. So as we read the book of the Revelation...
They gave us a clue though.
Oh.
Spiritually...
You are so right on the money. I absolutely love it when either Jesus or the angel or somebody speaking just tells us what that sign means. I just love it because that way you and I don't have to sit here and debate, what do you think the lampstands are? What do you think the lampstands are? The text simply tells us the lampstands are and here, you're dead on that passage. That thank you for telling us that, because otherwise we might think John doesn't know what he's talking about. He thinks that Jesus was crucified in Sodom thousands of years before, or he thinks he was crucified in Egypt. Okay, so what was Jesus' favorite mode of teaching? Parables. So a parable is a story, and that story is meant to communicate a truth, right? Now, we could take any of Jesus' parables, and we could put it so far into the literal that we're going to miss the meaning, right? We could also take it so far into the symbol that we could also miss the meaning. So, for example, Jesus talks about this guy. He has 2 sons. One of the sons says, Dad, give me my inheritance now, and I'm out of town. And when he comes back, he says, Dad, I'm not worthy to be here. And Dad lets him back in the house, Not only does Dad let him back in the house, but Dad restores him. Now, you and I could try and figure out, did Jesus know this dad? What was this dad's name? Where was this? Was this in Jerusalem, or was this up in Galilee? Where did the son go? Is this Zebekiah's boys, or is this Jonah's boy? We could take it that far, and we could try and isolate everything and take it too literal, and we miss that God wants the son to come back. Now, on the flip side, we could take a parable. A guy is walking down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he gets robbed. And we could take everything. Let's start with the guy. Since he's leaving Jerusalem, and Jerusalem's the Holy Spirit, the holy city, he's Adam. And since the robbers fall upon him, the robbers must be the demons and the devil. And since they strip him, that must mean they took his original righteousness. And since the priest walks by and does nothing, that must mean that the Mosaic law can't help you. And since the Levite walks by and he doesn't help, that must mean that circumcision and the dietary codes can't help you. And since the Samaritan walks by, he must be Jesus. And since he puts him on his own beast, that must be Jesus putting us on his merits. And he takes us to the inn, and the inn must be the church. And he gives the innkeeper 2 coins. That must be the word and the sacrament. And he says, take care of him, and when I come back, that must be Jesus referring to the second coming. And we've taken all of these bits and pieces and things within the parable, and we've made it into this incredible story, right? But did we miss the point that Jesus was talking about? Because Jesus was asked the question, who is my neighbor? And Jesus answers with this story, and he asks the guy, so who was the neighbor? The guy who was kind to him. You got the point of the parable. And if we're going to get into all these symbols, right? And I tell you, that guy's Adam. But you tell me, no, that guy's not Adam. That guy is Abraham. And you say, no, that guy's not Abraham. That guy is Israel as a whole, you know. And I said that the 2 coins are the word and the sacrament. And you say, no, they're baptism and the sacrament. And you say, no, they're, you know. I mean, how could we, who's to say, if we're going to break down everything that way, who's to say who's right and who's wrong? But again, we miss the point of the actual parable, don't we, when we do this?
Sun. Experience.
Outside.
Outdoors.
Oh.
Sunshine.
Okay. Okay, so we're communicating in sign language here, and we're not doing it perfectly. She's much better at it than I am. But I tried to ask her if the sun is shining outside. I was under the impression this is outside.
Oh, outdoors.
Oh, okay. And then I asked if you like socks, and you said, yes, I like socks. And then I asked if you eat socks. And I think you said sometimes. And yeah, exactly. Now the point here that I wanted to do this, and I was so hoping you would be here that we could do this, is to everybody else, we're like making signs to each other, but what are we saying? What's going on? Now if you don't know the signs, of course we look kind of odd. We look kind of, I don't want to say foolish, because I don't want to say that about the deaf community or anything like that, but if you don't see the signs, let me ask you a question. On many street corners out here, there's this thing. It's on a pole, it's red, and it has a word. It says stop. Is that a sign? Does it actually have any physical property that could make you stop? No.
It's a suggestion.
Well, some people think it is, huh? You know? Now, the cross traffic, especially if it's a one-way stop, they may have the physical ability to make you stop very suddenly, right? But it actually can't stop you, can it? You have to see the sign and you have to obey the sign. But does that sign always mean you can't go ever past this place? This is a stop sign, you've got to turn around and go back? Or does it mean, in our culture, in our language, you've got to stop, you've got to look, and once it's clear you can go, right? So then, let me ask you, that whole thing with Jesus and the parables, we can take the parables wrong. As we come to the book of the Revelation, do you think that we can take it wrong if we don't recognize the signs? If we don't recognize the symbols, do you think that we could take this book incredibly the wrong direction? Sure, especially going back to my analogy, or my point about Jesus isn't a literal lion, he's not a literal lamb, and yet we're supposed to see Jesus in the lion and in the lamb, right? The book of the Revelation has what is called Progressive Parallelism. Progressive Parallelism is the idea that the chapters are not in chronological order, and instead they're telling us this picture of what's going on, and sometimes those pictures might overlap each other. Let me give you an example. Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 through 14 talks about these two witnesses. Talks about their ministry. It talks about that they'll be killed. Talks about that they'll be resurrected and they'll ascend to heaven. Verses 15 and 19, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our God and of His Christ. And verse 18 has judgments and rewards. We've reached the end. We've reached the end because we've gotten to the world has become the world of God and of Christ, and we've gotten to judgments and we've gotten to rewards, right? And we turn the page and we're in chapter 12, and suddenly verses 1 and 2, there's this woman, she's clothed with the stars, she's about to give birth. There's this great dragon who's going to devour the child. Verse 5, a son is going to be born who's going to rule the nations. Who is this? Who is this? It's Jesus. It's Jesus, isn't it? The dragon is thrown out of heaven, and then the dragon makes war against the woman and her offspring, right? So, Revelation chapter 11, we get to the end, because we get to the world has become the world of God and the world of His Christ, and we've gotten to judgment, and we've gotten to rewards, and we turn the page, and suddenly we're back at the beginning of the story.
Where in 11 does it say that what you just said, that you're surmising that it's the end? And
Oh, verse 18? Verse 18, we get to judgments and we get to rewards. And again, we turn the page, and suddenly we're back at the beginning of the story. Well, now, if this is Jesus, and we all agree that this is Jesus, right? Is Jesus still to be born sometime in the future? Or was Jesus born back in Bethlehem, about 4 BC? We get to the end, we turn the page, and suddenly we're back at the beginning of the story. And the story talks about this dragon, and this dragon is tossed out of heaven, and he goes about making war against the woman and against her offspring. And suddenly, we're getting a different picture of church history. The church begins, the birth of Christ. He's going to rule the nations. Satan is going to work against him. Satan is not going to be able to overcome him. So Satan is going to work against the church. And this is what's going on suddenly in this chapter, after the chapter that we reached the end. We reached judgments and rewards. Now, why do I think that this is a retelling of the ministry of Christ and of the church? Well, Revelation chapter 12 starts talking about a retelling of Christ's mission, and it mentions Satan being cast out of heaven. We go to Luke chapter 10. Jesus has sent out the people to preach His word, to heal the sick, to cast out demons. They've come back to Him and they've said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. And Jesus says, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Isn't that an interesting thing? That Jesus says this during His life, during His earthly ministry, and here in the book of the Revelation, in this picture of church history, we see Satan being thrown out of heaven. Not sometime in the distant future, but sometime during the ministry of Christ. If you have any questions or anything, remember we'll have a question and answer period. 16, 19, and 20 as parallel. Revelation chapter 16, verses 13 through 16, there's this great gathering for the great war at Har-Magedon, or in English, Armageddon. Thank you. In English, Har-Magedon. And then in Revelation 19, starting in verse 19, the kings and the armies are assembled for war, and verses 20 through 21 are the outcome of that war. By the way, how many end times wars are there going to be? Just one, right? We've always talked about Armageddon. We've always talked about the day of that great war. Revelation chapter 20, starting in verse 7, going to verse 10, we have the gathering again, gathering for war. We have Gog and Magog, allusions to Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. Revelation chapter 19, 17 through 21, and 20 through 8 through 10 are the same battle. They're just told from different perspectives. They're just told from different areas. There have been television shows that have done this right and they've done this wrong. One of my favorite shows that have ever done this, that first, before that first commercial, you're watching and it's being told from one character's perspective. Then you have the commercial break, and then the show starts again at the very beginning, and you think at first, wait, there must be something wrong with my feed, my cable or something like that. But now the story is told from another character's perspective. And then by that third commercial, once again, the story starts again at the beginning, and now it's being told from another character's perspective, and things that didn't make sense in that first 10 minutes of the show now suddenly make sense because of something else somebody else saw from a different perspective in the show. Now, I'm not comparing the Bible to a television show. I'm just using that as a bit of an illustration. Now, is it good exegy? That is, am I sticking with the text to come to the conclusion that chapter 20 can't chronologically follow chapter 19? Well, chapter 19 ends with all those being deceived by Satan. The chapter ends with everybody being dead. So you read chapter 19, and that's the chapter that Jesus comes back. And that's the chapter that the beast and the false prophet are thrown into the lake of fire, and anybody who took the mark is killed, and they're killed with the sword that comes out of Jesus' mouth. And the birds of the sky come to eat. Everybody is dead at the end of chapter 19. So you had two people groups in chapter 19. Those on earth who followed the beast and took the mark and so forth. And you have Jesus coming back with His saints, His church, and so forth, right? And then everybody's dead. We turn the page and we get into Revelation chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20 starts with Satan being bound and locked in the abyss. Verse 3 of chapter 20 tells us the reason that Satan is locked and bound in the abyss, so that he cannot go out deceiving the nations anymore. If everybody is dead that was on the side of Satan in chapter 19, and chapter 20, the reason that he's put in the abyss is so that he can't deceive the nations, who's there to deceive? It's an interesting question, isn't it? It's a good question. It's a question that, once again, maybe now you're going to go home and you're going to read chapter 19 and you're going to ask, well, is there anybody else that could be there? If 19 chronologically follows 20, who could there be for Satan to deceive as chapter 20 begins? This is one of those areas that, again, I started this presentation with the idea that if I don't convince you, that's fine. Maybe you want to go home and you want to read this chapter. You want to test my exegy, and maybe you want to ask me a couple questions in the next couple days or in the next couple weeks. You want to think about this. That's absolutely fine. That's one of the good things about this kind of whose understanding of this view actually accounts for the majority of the text. Amillennialism. Amillennialism is a little bit of a misnomer. That is to say, it's a little bit of a bad name. When you put an A on the front of a word in English, it means no or not, right? So a theist is somebody who believes in God. So you put A on the beginning of theist and you have atheist. An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe in God. Muse is to think and to ponder. Amuse is to not think and to not ponder. That's why it's so fun. That's why we like to go to amusement places, you know. Amillennialism literally would mean there's no millennia, and that's not what amillennialism says. Amillennialism believes that the millennia started at the church age. It began with the first coming of Christ, and it will last until Christ's second coming. And so the numbers in the book of the Revelation, we have 7 everywhere, we have 10 a couple places, we have 1,000. The amillennialist approaches the text not looking for these numbers to be literal. He's looking for these numbers to be a symbol of something. And so where the premillennialist and the postmillennialist and the historical premillennialist does believe that there's going to be a millennia, there's going to be year 1, day 1 of the millennia, and it's going to go to day 365, or in the Jewish calendar, a few less, of year 1000. The amillennialist doesn't see a literal millennia that you could measure in human years or earth years or anything like that. When Jesus came and died and was buried and rose from the dead and the church began, that was the beginning of the millennia. And the millennia will continue however many years until Christ comes back. That's the actual understanding of the amillennialist position of the millennia. Before Christ, only the Jews had God's revelation. Only the Jews possessed the Old Testament. And with very few exceptions, was there a great deal of proselytizing going on. Only Esther, the Queen of Sheba, things like that. We didn't have great evangelistic missions in Israel spreading the Word of God. The Word of God was confined only to Israel. So all of the other nations were under the influence of Satan. Now, did they know that they were under the influence of Satan? Probably not. The Beelzebub controversy, Matthew chapter 12 and Mark chapter 13. Jesus says, when the Pharisees see that he's casting out demons, and they come along and they say, he casts out demons by the power of the ruler of the prince of demons. And Jesus says, in order to plunder the strong man's house, one must first tie him up. Jesus' first coming, since Jesus' first coming, Satan has been bound from deceiving the nations. Now, what does binding mean and what does it not mean? Bound does not mean powerless, completely restricted, but what it does mean is that Satan can't stop the gospel and Satan can't stop the church. You think about a lion or a dog and you've put a chain on that dog or on that lion can only go so far as that chain will let the lion or the dog. But if you get within that circle that the lion's chain will reach, well then you're fair game. But you stay outside of the lion's reach in the church and the lion cannot get you. Now and still to come. The view of the amillennialist is that the kingdom is now and it's still to come. That is to say, Jesus says, Matthew chapter 12 verse 28, Jesus says, if I cast out demons by the finger of God, then the kingdom of God has come amongst you. Oftentimes in the millennial camps, the idea is, and again, I'm not trying to straw man anybody's argument. I'm simply saying that there have been people who said that Jesus, his initial mission was to the Jews. And the Jews didn't accept the Messiah. So the kingdom is put on hold and Jesus turned his attention to the church. And then once the church age is done at the rapture, then Jesus is going to work back on Jerusalem, back on the Jews. And that's when the kingdom is going to come about. But if you remember Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar has the dream. And the dream is the statue. And the statue has the gold, the silver, the bronze, and the clay mixed with the iron. And it says that the rock was cut out without human hands, and it hit the statue on the feet, and the statue collapsed. And the rock grew into a mountain that would never end or never cease. So the amillennialist position is that the kingdom of God is here. It is now. God is reigning. Christ is reigning. But not in the fullness, not in the truest sense that we see after chapter 20 and into chapter 21, 22 of the book of the Revelation. And with that, I think I've presented amillennialism, and I'm going to open the floor for questions.